Hello, this is Game Master Karakin, and this is the second Lore Blurb for the Force Echo series. This one on the Federal States of Europe. The Federal States of Europe is an idea stemming all the way back to post-Second World War thinking, and is the next logical step in the development of the European Union. Much of the development of the EU is the same in the universe of Force Echo as it is in our own timeline. The exception of the fact that the threat of an imperial United States led it to be more cohesive, faster. In reaction to the triumvirate companies taking over so much of the American and generally Western development of weapons and computation, European Federalist forces created the European Strategic and Tactical Coterie, a confederation of European business and government corporations. The coterie was intended to mimic the success of the centralized model of the triumvirate, but make use of the many strengths of the European Union's member companies to produce superior equipment. The main result was that it was more decentralized, although similarly controlled and directed by a small group of people. The ESTC strived to maintain a separate European identity in the face of rising American dominance, while still working with their close allies. With the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, the EU reunified Germany and consolidated its power in the region, but, with US power still on the rise, began to be concerned about its future. In the early 2000s, Federalist powers began pushing much harder for a United States of Europe in the face of the rising power of China, and secretly the United States. In 2015, coinciding by the recent election of another populist president of the United States, the EU ruling council began meeting in secret with their black operations departments for the purpose of nipping the rising giant in the bud. The plan in the making was devised and set into motion in 2018 and perpetrated by early 2019. In reaction to this attack, the US once again went into full mobilization mode and renewed their efforts in the Middle Eastern region, which the EU cabal praised as an effort that would squeeze the energy from the superpower. Their jubilation, however, was short-lived, as the same year the Swedish government fell to a coup by a local supercell of the newly formed ISIS. The resulting loss in a northern ally, along with the attack on a NATO member, called much of the EU into the fight with ISIS, and brought the US military further into European matters as they deployed armies into the Swedish mainland. Tactical nuclear strikes on EU borders by ISIS began in this period, and persisted until and after the American withdrawal. In 2021, in reaction to an extreme rise in European national sentiment, Britain managed to leave the EU, and the following year was vindicated as the EU announced the development of a European army separate from NATO or member state militaries. In 2021, evidence was found that implicated China in a large influx of arms into ISIS, and the suspicion that this was an attack on the interests and economies of the West was proven true. That same year, the petrodollar was ended, as it had been known up until that point, causing the global economy to take a massive hit. This, alongside with the U.S. defaulting on debts owed to China, took a substantial chunk of the resources from the hands of the EU member states and their citizens and drove the people into the hands of federalist powers. In early 2024, the United States opened up its reserves and production as a substitute for the former OPEC countries, and the EU was forced to take a sizable stake in the new source, as well as a massive new stake in Russian oil and natural gas. 2025. Cabal forces began the groundwork for formation of the superstate, and began to launch formation in early 2028. The vote caused a constitutional crisis in the EU, as many of its member states resisted the idea of a reformation. But when the news of EU involvement in the 2019 strike opened up, fearful member states voted for the formation in response to a possible war with the United States, and the Federal States of Europe was born. With the FSE came the Denial Commission, a special authority guiding member states to the correct interpretation of the obviously false assertions of their once ally. Not long after 2028 concluded, the U.S. stopped supplying Europe of oil, excluding Britain, and defaulted on its debt owed to European countries. The United States withdrew from NATO. The organization was dissolved in all but name, as forces within it were reorganized into the new FSC military. The world economy tanked, as trade between Europe and the U.S. and Europe and China essentially ceased. Trade with Russia, South America, India, and African states eventually took some of the burden off, but from this point forward, the economy of the world began a dreadfully quick balkanization. The FSC began taking a war footing, and began to mobilize as it was attacked by ISIS and prepared for a potential war in the U.S. In 2030, the U.S. removed all assets from the Mediterranean and began focusing on its Pacific and Atlantic fleets. This freed much of the area from potential attack by American forces, but also opened the way for a direct attack by ISIS into Turkey and other European territories. In 2031, a journalist working under the pseudonym of Hannibal broke through the restraints of the Denial Commission and began spreading the word of the true involvement of the founders of the FSC on the 2019 attack on New York. Today, in 2040, the FSC mirrors the Archduchy of Austria, full of conflicting religious and ethnic groups resisting assimilation into a new European identity, with a repressed minority of citizens and former member states that believe that the current state of the world is due to a few globalist machinations. Fractious and vulnerable, while also being quite powerful in its own right, the FSC works to consolidate its whole territories and grow its strength to rival the hyperpower of the United States and their new coalition, the G4. Hope you enjoyed that. Next part will be coming soon. This is Bingy Master Karrakin, signing off.